The capital world of the Galactic Council was a monument to infinite power. The planet, named Ethelgard, did not have a night sky. It was entirely encased in a shimmering golden shell of solar collectors. This was the Great Swarm, a Dyson structure that captured every single photon of energy from the planet's host star. The energy was then beamed down to the surface, providing limitless, clean, and abundant power to the trillions of beings who lived in the sprawling, multi-layered cities below. On Ethelgard, energy was not just a resource. It was the foundation of their entire civilization. It was their currency, their religion, and their ultimate weapon. The council species had long ago forgotten what it meant to lack power. They lived in a state of perpetual abundance. Their buildings were constructed from hard-light projections and self-repairing smart metals. Their ships could cross the galaxy in days, powered by the endless output of captive stars. They believed they had reached the pinnacle of evolution. They had conquered the dark. High Counselor Valen stood on the balcony of the Grand Spire, looking out over the capital city of Prime. The city was a breathtaking vista of glowing towers, floating platforms, and rivers of pure, liquid light. Valen was a tall, elegant being with pale blue skin and large, dark eyes that reflected the golden glow of the city. He wore the heavy, intricate robes of his office, woven from threads that generated their own soft luminescence. He took a deep breath of the perfectly climate-controlled air. It smelled faintly of ozone and blooming night flowers, a scent engineered to promote calm and clarity. Valen felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The council was at peace. The outer rim territories were subdued. The trade routes were secure. And most importantly, the energy flows were stable. High Counselor, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. Valen turned. His aide, a younger council member named Kale, stood in the doorway. Kale held a translucent datapad, his expression carefully neutral. "Report, Kale," Valen said, his voice smooth and resonant. "The delegation from Earth has arrived," Kale said. "They are waiting in the antechamber. Ambassador Vance requests an audience." Valen sighed, a subtle shift in his posture. Humanity, the newest and by far the most frustrating addition to the galactic community. They had only achieved faster-than-light travel a few centuries ago. Compared to the ancient empires of the Council, humans were infants. They were loud, chaotic, and incredibly inefficient. While the Council species had mastered the elegant art of stellar siphoning, humans were still burning things. They still relied on crude fission, messy fusion, and chemical reactions. They were a species that had spent its entire history fighting over scraps of resources on their homeworld, and they had brought that same desperate, scavenging mindset to the stars. "Let them wait a little longer," Valen said, turning back to the glowing city. "It is important for them to understand the scale of what they are dealing with. They need to feel the weight of the Council." "Of course, High Counselor," Kale said. "Shall I inform them of the agenda for the meeting?" "No," Valen replied. "Let them wonder. It makes them nervous. Nervous species are more pliable. We have a very specific message to deliver to the humans today, and I want them to be entirely focused when I speak." Valen looked back at the golden sky. The humans were a curiosity, nothing more. They were a species that had somehow stumbled into the galactic stage without the proper technology or the refined culture to match the Council. They were energy-poor, technologically backward, and politically fractured. It was only a matter of time before they realized their place in the grand hierarchy of the universe. Today was the day they would learn that lesson. Today, the Council would put humanity in its proper place. Chapter 2. The Weight of the Weight. Down in the antechamber, human ambassador Elena Vance sat in a chair that was perfectly contoured to her spine, yet somehow still felt uncomfortable. The room was a masterpiece of alien design, featuring walls that shifted in color to match the mood of the occupants and a floor that gently massaged the soles of the feet. Elena ignored all of it. She was focused on the small, physical datapad in her hands. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp features, graying hair pulled back into a severe bun, and eyes that had seen too many negotiations to be easily impressed. She wore a simple, dark gray suit. No metals, no glowing threads, no unnecessary ornaments. Just practical, professional clothing. Beside her sat David, her chief aide and lead engineer. He was younger, tapping his foot nervously against the smart floor. "They're making us wait," David muttered, glancing at the shifting walls. "It's a classic power play. They want us to feel small before we even walk into the chamber." "Let them play their games, David," Elena said, not looking up from her datapad. "Waiting is just a way to burn time, and time is something we have plenty of. Power is what they care about. Let them have their little psychological tricks." "But it's not just psychology," David pointed out, lowering his voice. "They control the grid. They control the trade routes. They control the stellar siphons. We are sitting in a room powered by their energy, breathing air filtered by their machines, using translators powered by their batteries. If they decide to turn it all off, we're dead in the water." Elena finally looked up. She gave David a small, reassuring smile. "That's what they think. That's what they've always thought. They look at our ships and see chemical rockets. They look at our colonies and see struggling outposts. They think we're begging for scraps. Aren't we?" David asked. "No," Elena said softly. "We're just biding our time. There is a difference between begging for scraps and waiting for the harvest. They think energy is about how much you can generate. They think it's about building bigger and bigger collectors around bigger and bigger stars." She closed her datapad and placed it on the table. "They don't understand that energy isn't just about creation, David. It's about control. And today we are going to show them exactly how much control we really have." Before David could ask what she meant, the massive doors at the end of the antechamber slid open with a soft, harmonious chime. A tall, uniformed council guard stepped in. "Ambassador Vance," the guard said. His voice translated perfectly by the small device at Elena's collar. "The High Counselor will see you now." Elena stood up, smoothing her jacket. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look odd. She just looked ready. "Let's go, David," she said. "Time to collect our harvest." Chapter 3: The Chamber of Judgment. The Grand Chamber of the Council was a space designed to make anyone standing in the center feel infinitely small. It was a massive, circular room, with tiered seating rising hundreds of feet into the air. The walls were made of a dark, polished obsidian that absorbed the light, making the glowing representatives in the seats look like stars in a night sky. In the center of the room, surrounded by a ring of polished white stone, stood a single, simple podium. Elena walked into the center of the room. Her footsteps echoed clearly in the vast space. She could feel the eyes of 300 different species watching her from the shadows above. She kept her posture straight, her face neutral. David walked a half-step behind her, carrying a small, metallic case. High Counselor Valen looked down from his elevated podium at the very top of the tier. He did not stand when she entered. He simply rested his hands on the glowing console in front of him. "Ambassador Vance." Valen's voice boomed through the chamber, rich and authoritative. "Welcome to the Grand Chamber. We appreciate you making the journey to Ethelgard." "Thank you, High Counselor," Elena said. Her voice was calm, carrying clearly through the translation network. "It is always a pleasure to visit the capital. Let us dispense with the pleasantries," Valen said, his tone shifting from welcoming to businesslike. "The Council has reviewed the latest economic and energy reports from the human sector. The findings are concerning." Elena remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "Humanity's energy consumption is growing at an unsustainable rate," Valen explained. "Your colonies are expanding, but your power generation is not keeping pace. You are still relying on primitive fission and inefficient fusion. You are drawing heavily on the Council's shared energy grid to make up the deficit. This is a strain on our resources." "We pay for the energy we draw, Counselor," Elena said evenly. "Our trade tariffs and mineral exports more than cover the cost of the power we import." "Currency is not energy," Valen countered smoothly. "You can print credits. You cannot print power. The Council's priority is the stability of the Great Swarm and the comfort of our core worlds. We cannot allow a primitive, inefficient species to drain our reserves to fuel their rapid, uncontrolled expansion. A murmur of agreement rippled through the alien delegates in the shadows. Therefore, Valen continued, raising a hand to silence the room, the Council has voted to implement the energy tithe. Effective immediately, humanity will be restricted to a strict energy quota. 90% of your current consumption will be redirected to the Council's Central Reserve. You will be allowed to keep 10%, which is more than enough for your basic survival needs. The rest of your colonies will have to scale back. You will stop expanding. You will stabilize. The chamber fell dead silent. David, standing behind Elena, felt his stomach drop. 90%. It wasn't a reduction. It was a strangulation. It meant shutting down the orbital shipyards, grounding the transport fleets, and putting the outer colonies into a deep freeze. It meant halting human progress entirely. Elena did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked up at Valen. "And if we refuse?" she asked. Valen smiled, a cold, patronizing expression. "You will not refuse, Ambassador. The technology you use to interface with our grid was provided by the Council. It contains standard security protocols. If you do not accept the tithe, we will simply activate the remote shutdown sequence. Your grid will go dark. Your reactors will scram. Your lights will go out. You will have no choice but to accept the 10% allocation." It was a blatant threat. The Council was holding a gun to humanity's head and calling it a negotiation. "You are asking us to cripple our civilization," Elena said, her voice still perfectly level. "You are asking us to condemn billions of our citizens to hardship just to maintain your surplus." "We are asking you to be responsible," Valen corrected. "You are a young species. You do not understand the burden of managing galactic energy. We are simply guiding you. You have 24 standard hours to sign the tithe agreement. If you do not, the shutdown will commence. Good day, Ambassador." Valen turned his back to her, dismissing her entirely. The guard stepped forward, gesturing for Elena and David to leave. Elena stood in the center of the room for a long moment. She looked up at the glowing tiers, at the hundreds of alien species that looked down at her with pity and contempt. They thought they had won. They thought they had checkmated humanity with a simple flip of a switch. She turned and began to walk out. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. Just before she reached the massive doors, she stopped. She turned back to face the chamber. "High Counselor," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. Valen paused, looking over his shoulder. "We will not sign the tithe," Elena said. "But we will not fight you either. Instead, I have a request. Before you shut down our grid, allow us a public demonstration. Allow us to show the Council our new energy generation technology. If we can prove that we can generate enough power to meet the Council's surplus requirements, the tithe will be unnecessary." Valen laughed. It was a rich, genuine sound of amusement. The entire chamber seemed to chuckle with him. "Ambassador Vance," Valen said, shaking his head, "you burn coal and split atoms. You struggle to keep a single colony powered. What new technology could you possibly have that would impress the Council? But, very well. I will grant your request. It will be a humbling experience for your people. Bring your machine to the Colosseum of Light in 3 standard days. Show us your best. And then, watch your lights go out." Elena nodded once. 3 days. We will be ready." She turned and walked out of the chamber. The doors hissed shut behind her. In the antechamber, David let out a long, shaky breath. "Elena, what are we going to do? We don't have a new reactor. We don't have anything that can generate that kind of power." Elena looked at the small, metallic case David was carrying. She reached out and placed her hand on the cool metal. "We aren't going to generate power, David," she said softly. "We're going to show them what happens when you stop looking at how much energy you can make and start looking at how much energy you can take away." Chapter 4. The Days of Preparation. The 3 days before the demonstration passed in a blur of activity. On Ethelgard, the Council species went about their business, entirely unbothered by the humans' impending humiliation. The news networks broadcasted the story with a tone of mild amusement. They showed footage of human colonies, highlighting the struggling infrastructure and the primitive power plants. The narrative was clear. The humans were desperate, delusional, and about to be put in their place. In the human embassy, however, the atmosphere was entirely different. There was no panic. There was no desperation. There was only the quiet, focused hum of engineers and scientists working with absolute precision. David stood in the embassy's secure workshop, watching the final assembly of the device. It didn't look like much. It was a simple, cylindrical machine, about the size of a large water cooler. It was made of dull, gray metal with no glowing lights, no elegant curves, and no humming energy fields. It looked like a piece of industrial plumbing. "Is it stable?" David asked, looking at the lead engineer, a woman named Sarah. Sarah didn't look up from her datapad. "The containment field is holding at 100%. The thermal exchange rate is nominal. It's ready." David looked at the machine, then at Elena, who was sitting at a desk, reviewing the speech she would give. "Elena, I still don't understand how this is going to work. The Council's microstar fragment can output enough energy to power a continent. How is this thing going to match that?" Elena looked up from her desk. She walked over to the machine and placed a hand on its cold metal surface. "David, you're still thinking like them," she said gently. "You're thinking about generation. You're thinking about how to build a bigger fire. The Council has spent 10,000 years building bigger and bigger fires. They think power is about how much heat you can create." She tapped the metal cylinder. "This isn't a generator. It's an entropy engine." David frowned. "Entropy? Like the universe cooling down? Like things breaking apart?" "Exactly," Elena said. "The second law of thermodynamics. Heat flows from hot to cold. Energy spreads out. The universe is constantly moving toward a state of maximum entropy, where everything is the same temperature and nothing happens. The Council fights this. They build stars, they build reactors, they fight the cold. They think entropy is the enemy." She looked at David, her eyes sharp. "We didn't fight it. We weaponized it." Sarah stepped forward, holding up a small, physical model of the machine's internal workings. "The Council's energy grid is based on thermal dynamics. They create heat and they use that heat to do work. But heat is just molecular movement. If you want to stop a machine, you don't need to blow it up. You just need to stop the molecules from moving. You just need to remove the heat." She pointed to the core of the model. "The entropy engine doesn't create energy. It creates a localized vacuum for heat. It accelerates entropy. It pulls thermal energy out of the surrounding environment and converts it into usable electricity. The hotter the environment, the more power it makes. But the side effect is that the environment gets incredibly, incredibly cold." David stared at the machine, the realization slowly dawning on him. "So, when you put this next to their microstar fragment, it won't just absorb the heat," Elena said. "It will drain it. It will pull the thermal energy out of the star fragment so fast that the fusion reactions will stop. It will freeze the star." David swallowed hard. "Is that safe for us?" "Yes," Elena said. "We've tested it in the deep void. But for the Council, it's going to be a very harsh lesson in physics." Chapter 5: The Colosseum of Light. The Colosseum of Light was the largest public arena on Ethelgard. It was a massive, open-air stadium, capable of holding millions of spectators, both in person and via holographic projection. The air was filled with the hum of conversation and the bright, golden glow of the city above. In the center of the arena, on a raised platform of white marble, sat the Council's demonstration table. High Councillor Valen sat in a raised viewing box, surrounded by the other members of the High Council. The press was out in full force, thousands of floating camera drones buzzing like metallic insects. Elena and David stood on the opposite side of the platform. Between them sat the dull, gray cylinder of the entropy engine. It looked incredibly out of place amidst the glowing, elegant architecture of the arena. "The galaxy is watching, Ambassador." Valen's voice echoed through the stadium, amplified for the millions listening. You asked for this demonstration. You claimed you could match the council's energy output. The stage is yours. Elena stepped up to the microphone. She looked out at the sea of alien faces, at the glowing cameras, at the arrogant posture of the High Council. Members of the council, Elena began, her voice calm and clear. For 10,000 years, you have ruled the galaxy through the mastery of energy. You have built Dyson swarms. You have siphoned the hearts of stars. You believe that power is defined by how much energy you can generate. She gestured to the council side of the table. Show them, counselor, Elena said. Valen smiled. He pressed a button on his console. On the council side of the table, a containment field activated. Inside the field, a small, swirling sphere of blinding white light appeared. It was a microstar fragment, a piece of a star captured and held in a magnetic bottle. It radiated immense heat and light, casting sharp shadows across the arena. The crowd gasped in awe. It was a beautiful, terrifying display of raw power. This is a microstar fragment, Valen announced proudly. It outputs enough thermal and radiant energy to power the entire capital city for a year. It is the pinnacle of council engineering. Let us see if your primitive machine can match this. Elena nodded. She turned to the dull gray cylinder. The council measures power by what it can create, Elena said. Humanity measures power by what it can control. We do not build bigger fires. We control the cold. She reached out and pressed a single physical button on the top of the entropy engine. There was no hum. There was no flash of light. There was no dramatic surge of energy. Instead, there was a sound. A sharp, cracking sound, like a glacier splitting in half. Instantly, the air in the arena dropped in temperature. The comfortable, climate-controlled breeze turned into a biting, freezing wind. The floating camera drones nearest to the platform began to malfunction, their internal batteries draining rapidly in the sudden cold. On the table, the entropy engine began to glow. It didn't glow with the bright white light of the microstar. It glowed with a deep, dark, pulsing blue light. It was the color of the deepest ocean, the color of the winter night. And it was pulling. Valen stood up, his smile fading. He looked at the containment field holding the microstar fragment. The blinding white light was flickering. High Counselor, his chief scientist Xyler whispered, leaning in close. The energy output of the fragment. It's dropping. Drop the containment field's resistance, Valen ordered quietly. Push more power into the magnetic bottle. I am, Xyler said, his fingers flying across his datapad. But it's not working. The human device, it's not just absorbing the heat. It's deleting it. On the table, the microstar fragment was changing color. The blinding white shifted to a pale yellow, then to a deep orange, and then to a dull, angry red. The immense heat radiating from it was vanishing, sucked into the dark blue glow of the entropy engine. Frost began to form on the white marble table. It spread rapidly, creeping toward the containment field. The air grew so cold that the breath of the council members in the front rows turned to visible clouds of ice crystals. The crowd in the stadium was dead silent. The awe had turned to confusion, and the confusion was rapidly turning into fear. What is happening? Valen demanded, his voice losing its smooth authority. Shut it down. Shut the human machine down. I can't, Xyler said, his voice rising in panic. The machine isn't drawing power from the grid. It's drawing thermal energy from the ambient environment. It's accelerating the local entropy. If I try to cut its power, it will just use the heat from my cutting tools to keep running. On the table, the microstar fragment turned from red to a dull, bruised purple. The swirling plasma inside the magnetic bottle was slowing down, the molecules losing their kinetic energy. The fusion reactions were stopping. With a final, sharp crack, the microstar fragment went black. It was no longer a star. It was a frozen, dead lump of matter, suspended in the magnetic field. The blinding light was gone. The immense heat was gone. The only light left in the arena was the deep, dark blue pulse of the entropy engine. Elena pressed the button again. The blue light faded. The machine returned to its dull, gray metal. The biting cold in the air slowly began to dissipate, replaced by the arena's automated climate control rushing to correct the temperature anomaly. Elena looked up at Valen. The High Counselor was staring at the dead, black lump of the microstar fragment. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. As I said, Elena spoke into the microphone, her voice echoing in the absolute silence of the stadium. We don't build bigger fires. We control the cold. Chapter 6. The Silence of the Scientists. The grand chamber of the council was in an uproar. The demonstration at the Colosseum had ended hours ago, but the shockwaves were still rippling through the highest levels of the government. The High Council had retreated to their private chambers, accompanied by their lead scientists and military advisors. The room was filled with the sound of shouting, overlapping voices, and the frantic tapping of datapads. High Counselor Valen sat at the head of the table, rubbing his temples. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. Explain it to me again, Valen said, his voice dangerously quiet. Explain it slowly and use simple words. Because right now, my mind is refusing to accept what my eyes saw. Chief Scientist Xyler stood at the front of the room. He was a brilliant mind, a master of thermodynamics and stellar engineering. But right now, he looked like a student who had just failed his final exam. High Counselor, Xyler began, his voice trembling slightly. The Council's entire energy infrastructure is based on thermal dynamics. We create heat and we use that heat to generate power. We build stars. We build reactors. We fight the natural tendency of the universe to cool down. He brought up a holographic projection of the entropy engine. The human device does not generate power. It accelerates entropy. It creates a localized vacuum for thermal energy. It pulls heat out of the surrounding environment and converts it into electricity. The hotter the environment, the more power it makes. But the side effect is that the environment gets incredibly cold. We know it gets cold, Valen snapped. We were freezing in the arena. What I want to know is how it killed a microstar fragment. That fragment was contained in a magnetic bottle. It should have been isolated. It was isolated from matter, Xyler explained. But it was not isolated from thermal radiation. The human device didn't touch the star. It just created a thermal gradient so extreme, so absolute, that the star fragment had no choice but to dump its heat into the device. It drained the kinetic energy from the plasma until the fusion reactions simply stopped. It didn't break the bottle. It just froze the contents. Valen stared at the hologram. So, it's just a very efficient heat sink. No, High Counselor, Xyler said, shaking his head. That is the problem. It is not just a heat sink. It is an entropy accelerator. If we scale this technology up, if they build a machine the size of a city, Xyler paused, swallowing hard. If they build a machine the size of a city and place it near one of our stellar siphons, it would drain the heat from the star. It would stop the fusion reactions. It would turn our suns into dead, frozen rocks in a matter of days. The room went dead silent. The shouting stopped. The tapping of datapads ceased. Military Commander Kalen, a massive, heavily armored being, stood up. Are you telling me that the humans have a weapon that can turn off our stars? I am telling you that they have the underlying technology to do exactly that, Xyler said. And based on the size of the device they brought today, which was small enough to fit on a table, scaling it up would be trivial for them. They could build a fleet of these engines. They could park them outside every core world in the council. Valen felt a cold knot form in his stomach. It was the same cold he had felt in the arena, but this time it wasn't from the machine. It was from pure, unadulterated terror. The council's confidence was built on a single, unshakable foundation. They controlled the energy. They held the keys to the stars. No one could fight them because no one could survive without the power they provided. They had threatened to turn off humanity's lights. But humanity had just shown them that they could turn off the galaxy's lights. If they can do this, Valen whispered, why haven't they used it? Why did they just sit there and let us threaten them with the tithe? Because they are not conquerors, Xyler said softly. They are survivors. They didn't build this weapon to attack us. They built it to ensure we would never attack them. They wanted to show us that their lights cannot be turned off. Because if we try, they will turn off ours. Valen looked around the room. He saw the fear in the eyes of his advisors. He saw the realization dawning on their faces. The grand, golden empire of the Council, the masters of the stars, the rulers of the infinite light, they were entirely at the mercy of a species that had weaponized the cold. The confidence of the Council had not just been shaken. It had collapsed entirely. Chapter 7: The Collapse of Confidence. The next morning, Elena Vance was summoned back to the Grand Chamber. This time, there was no waiting in the antechamber. The guards escorted her and David directly into the center of the room. The atmosphere was entirely different. The shifting walls were a dull, muted gray. The glowing representatives in the tiers were quiet, their usual arrogance replaced by a heavy, uncomfortable silence. High Counselor Valen stood at his podium. He did not look down at Elena with contempt. He looked at her with a mixture of respect and deep, lingering fear. "Ambassador Vance," Valen said, his voice lacking its usual booming resonance. "The Council has reviewed the data from yesterday's demonstration. Our scientists have spent the night running simulations. The conclusions are undeniable." Elena stood perfectly still. "I am glad the simulations were clear, High Counselor. We misunderstood your species," Valen continued. "We looked at your primitive reactors and your chemical rockets, and we assumed you were weak. We assumed you were energy poor. We did not realize that you were simply looking at the problem from a different angle." He paused, taking a deep breath. "The energy tithe is hereby cancelled. Effective immediately, all restrictions on human energy consumption are lifted. The Council will not only restore your previous allocations, but we will also open a new trade agreement. We will provide you with raw materials, and in exchange, we ask only for access to your scientific data regarding thermal dynamics." David let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. It was a total victory. More than a victory, it was a complete capitulation. Elena nodded slowly. "We accept the cancellation of the tithe. As for the trade agreement, we are willing to share the theoretical physics of entropy acceleration. However, the actual engineering schematics for the entropy engine will remain classified. We are happy to sell you the machines, but we will not give you the blueprints." Valen's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. "Acceptable. The Council values stability, and we recognize that humanity is a key component of that stability." He stepped down from his podium and walked to the edge of the raised platform, looking down at Elena. "You humbled us, Ambassador," Valen said quietly, so only she and David could hear. "You walked into our capital, into the heart of our power, and you showed us that our greatest strength is actually our greatest vulnerability. You hold the thermostat of the universe." "We don't want to rule the universe, Counselor," Elena said, looking up at him. "We just want to live in it. We don't want to turn off your stars. But we will never let you turn off ours." Valen looked at her for a long moment. He saw the absolute, unyielding resolve in her eyes. He realized then that the galaxy had changed forever. The era of the Council's absolute dominance was over. The age of human parity had begun. "Then let us ensure that neither of our stars ever go dark," Valen said. He extended his hand. Elena reached out and shook it. Her grip was firm, her hand warm. Chapter 8: The New Reality. The aftermath of the demonstration changed the Galactic Council forever. The story of the entropy engine spread across the galaxy faster than light. It was whispered in the cantinas of the Outer Rim. It was debated in the academic halls of the core worlds. It was studied by every military strategist in the known universe. The story was always the same. The mighty Council, the masters of infinite energy, had tried to bully a young, primitive species. The humans had responded by bringing a machine that could freeze a star. Humanity became a name to be respected and deeply feared. They were not the largest species in the galaxy. They did not have the oldest empires or the most elegant ships. But they had something no one else had. They had the ability to look at the fundamental laws of physics, find the weak points, and weaponize them. They didn't play by the Council's rules of energy generation. They changed the game entirely. Earth transitioned from a struggling, energy-poor colony to a major galactic power. They didn't just secure their own power grid. They became the primary suppliers of entropy engines to the Council. The Council species, terrified of the dark, paid exorbitant prices for the human machines to protect their stellar siphons. The economy of the galaxy shifted. Energy was no longer just about generation, it was about thermal management. The Council had to invest heavily in new defensive technologies, trying to shield their stars from the cold. But humanity was always one step ahead, refining the entropy engine, making it smaller, more efficient, and more devastating. High Counselor Valen retired a few years after the incident. He spent his days writing a memoir. The book was titled The Illusion of Infinite Light. It became a mandatory text in the Council's academies. In the book, Valen wrote, "We believed that power was about how much light we could create. We believed that if we controlled the stars, we controlled the galaxy. The humans taught us a different lesson. The humans taught us that light is just a temporary state. The universe is dark, and it is cold, and it is always waiting to reclaim what is theirs. We built our empire on the assumption that we could hold back the dark forever. The humans showed us that all it takes is one machine to let the dark back in.